Hello, everyone. I'm gonna give it a minute or two just to make sure that everything is all good. All right, thank you guys for giving me the quick wait. We're gonna go ahead and start reading. So, today on Wednesdays, we'll be reading the Communist Manifesto. I actually probably should put some headphones on so I can hear what I'm saying. Let me see. Hello? Okay. As I'm reading this, you guys can call me a hypocrite all you guys want, because I am doing this on a PC that I bought from Best Buy, mega corporation. So, and I have a PC that was probably built off of the backs of underpaid workers, forced workers, probably modern day child slavery. So, I feel like we're all hypocrites though in America. So that's all I can really say about it. So yeah, we're gonna just go ahead reading this Communist Manifesto. All right. Chapter 1, Preface. Through most of the 20th century, the importance of the Communist Manifesto was uncontested. It was important not because of its intrinsic merit, but it's because of the brute facts of the world politics. In the 20 or 30 years after 1950, millions in the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, and Eastern Europe lived under communist rule. Millions more, whether engaged in civil wars in Southern Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, or in political struggles in France, Greece, Italy, or Portugal, lived in countries in which communism was a powerful and inescapable presence. In Western Europe, communism was rejected as unacceptably authoritarian. But, strange though it now seems, until the 1960s it continued to be identified with an image of ruthless and energetic modernity. At the time of the Soviet five-year plans in the 1930s, it had been thought to possess an answer to mass unemployment. Through to the 1970s, it was widely believed to have the most effective solutions to economic backwardness. In many parts of the Third World, national liberation and anti-colonial movements concocted their creeds from a mixture of Marxism and nationalism, while even in the Northern and Western Europe, a blend of Keynesianism and moderate versions of socialist planning appeared to be in the ascendant. In Britain in 1964, for example, the Prime Minister, Mr. Wilson, a champion of forces of modernity, believed he had to produce a national plan to regenerate the country. Only in the United States, and even there, only after a sustained period of persecution in the McCarthy era, did the population appear Immune to the appeal of socialism. This is distracting. Okay. Clearly, therefore, and understanding the modern world appeared to require a knowledge of Marx, and Marx's message was most memorably set out in the Communist Manifesto. But in the 1980s and 1990s, the political landscape of this mid-20th century world was transformed beyond recognition. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1992, and the extinction of communist parties everywhere outside of China and Southeast Asia brought to an abrupt end a Cold War that most had come to accept as part of an order of things. No one had anticipated that communism would make such a rapid and undignified exit from history. Socialist and social democratic parties had also been forced into the defensive. From the time of the events in Paris in May 1968, libertarian and anti-authoritarian movements had emerged both on the left and on the right. The rise of a new and more aggressive laissez-faire conservatism, spearheaded by Miss Thatcher in Britain and President Reagan in the United States, brought an end to the post-Second World War consensus built upon exchange stability, full employment and Social Security. At the same time, the electoral basis of social democracy began to break up as the traditional industrial occupations throughout the developed world disappeared in the face of a shift of manufacture to the third world. In addition, developments in electronics, information technology, led to downsizing of corporations, the casualization of office employment, and yet more shedding of manual labor. In the new era, a growing prosperity of the majority of wage earners and the advanced economies was accompanied by increased insecurity and emergence of an underclass lacking in any useful function in the post-industrial economy. Traditional socialist and social democratic aspirations to shape the economy or to distribute wealth were all but abandoned. The increase in female employment has made the language of the manifesto appear dated. Appeals for the unity of working men have all but ceased. The growth of more individualized political concerns and the proliferation of single-use campaigns have made the ambition to turn the working class into a party appear incomprehensible. Belief in the possibility or even the desirability of a future communist society has become extinct. In this new era, the manifesto can no longer command automatic attention, and its importance needs to be thought out afresh. Well, it became one of very small number of political texts, Plato's Republic, Machiavelli's Prince, Hobbes' Leviathan, Rousseau's Social Contract, maybe others, that even centuries after the original composition still retain their power to shock, or will it, like the communist movement it once inspired, shrink in importance until it is little more than an object of curiosity for specialists in the history of political thought? Sip. Sorry. To this one question, there is one simple answer. The manifesto will remain a classic, if only because of its brief, still quite unsurpassed depiction of modern capitalism. Marx was the first to evoke the seemingly limitless powers of the modern economy and its truly global reach. He was the first to chart the staggering transformation produced in less than a century by the emergence of a world market and the unleashing of unparalleled productive powers of modern industry. He also delineated the endlessly inchoate, incessantly restless, and unfinished character of modern capitalism as a phenomenon. He emphasized its inherent tendency to invent new needs and the means to satisfy them, its subversion of all inherited cultural practices and beliefs, its disregards of all boundaries, whether sacred or secular, its destabilization of every hollowed hierarchy, whether of ruler and ruled, man, woman, or parent and child, its turning of everyone into an object for sale. That's true. In short, the manifesto sketches a vision of reality at the start of a new millennium and against a background of endless chatter about globalization and deregulation. Looks as powerful and contemporary a picture of our own world as it might have appeared to those reading it in 1848. In the period before 1870, political economists were slow to recognize the transforming power of the industrialization because they remained haunted by fears of overpopulation and the specter of diminishing returns. It was left to socialists in the 1830s and 1840s, particularly the followers of Robert Owen, and as apostles of what was then called social science, to identify themselves with the prospect of abundance and the possibility of a society freed from scarcity. But these potentialities were identified with science and cooperation. They were not usually associated with the market, which was denounced as a system of unequal exchange. They were not usually associated with the market, which was denounced as a system of unequal change, of the war of all against us, or of buying cheap and selling dear. From this position, it was easy to slip back into a nostalgia for a simpler society with predictable expectations and fixed needs. What was unusual, if not unique, about the manifesto, and this is by no means true of all Marx's other writings, was its unflinchingly modernist vision, in which the capitalist world market was not simply identified with destabilization and exploitation, but also with liberating power, the power to release people from backwardness and tradition-bound dependence. The continual process of innovation, the incessant invention of new needs, and the creation of new markets have not ceased since the time the manifesto was written. The tendency towards limitless expansion remains, even if it is now hindered by environmental dangers as it once was by diminishing returns. Communism, as subsequent history was to prove, was not the answer to contradictory tendencies at work in the world depicted by the manifesto, but whatever is said about the rest of the manifesto, its greatest achievement was to have built its theory upon a highly distinctive and strikingly novel vision of the modern world that, for all of its immense changes of a century and a half, still remains visibly our own. The case for historical importance of the manifesto is also powerful. For a century or more, it is now seemingly extraordinary theory of history as a class struggle leading inevitably towards the triumph of world communism, constituted as a credo embraced by tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, of adherents in every part of the world. Enunciated not as a statement of principle or expression or of a desire, but as a set of predictions, the formulations of the manifesto underpinned the creation of a worldwide labor movement in the last third of the 19th century, and in the 20th century fueled many of the political struggles and not a few of the wars that tore the world apart from 1917 to 1989. A more diluted form of the view of history expressed in the manifesto also made an impact far beyond the ranks of socialists and communists. It profoundly affected both the writing of history and the understanding of society among those without any direct acquaintance with the works of Marx. In place of a battle of ideas and creeds, it substituted the clash of social forces judged according to the goal of imminent or eventual social revolution. The materialist concept of history that Marx and Engels applied to their history of communism in the manifesto also gained wide acceptance beyond the ranks of communism, and it was to generate a mode of social and historical understanding which continues even after communism itself has begun to fade into history. Even now, for example, a spectrum stretching from despairing veterans of the old left to brash new champions of the free enterprise right have appeared to agree that the development of world capitalism encountered only one major challenge in its history, that of revolutionary socialism representing the industrial working class. Both groups appear to conclude that with the final overcoming of this challenge, the future progress of an unconstrained and fully globalized capitalism will proceed unimpeded. If this short-term stock taking after the Cold War reveals the lingering effects after the manifesto, so perhaps at a more stylish level does the stance adopted by a certain strands of postmodernist writing. This is the approach of all those French and American theorists who have concluded that because the struggle over communism is over, history itself must have come to an end. One way to counter such conclusions is to point out that challenges to a global development of laissez-faire capitalism did not begin with the industrialization and revolutionary socialism, nor is it likely that the collapse of communism and the end of industrial epoch will bring about their disappearance. Already the end of the old millennium has witnessed the beginnings of other and differently inspired attempts to set the global economic system with a more sustainable and ethically acceptable framework. Sorry about that, guys. Let me see, real quick. I need to figure out how to do this on YouTube. Whatever. I don't know how to see my videos on YouTube. I'm trying to see if I can see myself on YouTube like right now. Make sure I'm doing this correct. You can't even do that, so. But we're gonna continue reading, guys. But the best answer to this kind of postmodernism is to draw attention to the now forgotten sequence of events which resulted in the construction of the grand historical narrative associated with Marx. An investigation into the construction of the manifesto can explain how still compelling vision of the world was first stitched together. Such an explanation requires the telling of a rather lengthy and complicated story, but the story is important because it makes clear that much of what was first put forward in the manifesto and later accepted as common sense understanding of the making of the modern world belongs more to the realm of mythology than fact. In particular, such an account will show that what became Marxian socialism in Germany in the beginning had nothing to do with industrialization or the social and political aspirations of industrial workers. On the contrary, it emerged from debates among radical disciples of the German philosopher Hegel about what should replace Christianity, or Hegel's rationalized variant of it, absolute spirit. Furthermore, when seen in a larger European perspective, this emergence of German socialism out of a movement of religious reform was not particularly surprising. Socialism had also emerged out of post-Christian movements of religious reform in Britain and France at the beginning of the 19th century. And then here's like a little note, so I'm going to read this, okay? In France, the origins of what came to be called socialism went back to the 1790s, the decade of the French Revolution, and the search for a replacement for the Christian religion, which it was hoped would disappear like the monarchy. Socialism, the harmony of Fourier, or the religion of Newton, later the New Christian of Saint Simon, was to provide the spiritual power once possessed by the Catholic Church. In Britain, the new moral world promised by Robert Owen was presented without irony as a message from the second Messiah. The rational religion of the Owenites was a direct extension of the 18th century tradition of rational descent. It was put forward as a scientific replacement of traditional Christianity based upon original sin. What distinguished the German path from religious reform to Marxian socialism was not a difference in kind of the process that had produced so-called utopian socialism in France and Britain, but a difference between preceding religion and philosophical traditions. This account of the origins of socialism is elaborated in my forthcoming work, Before God Died, The Rise and Fall of the Socialist Utopia, by this guy. But yeah. In the manifesto, Marx and Engels made a successful effort to cover over the religious trackworks and to set in their place a socio-economic genealogy appropriate to their new communist self-image. In fact, as this introduction will show, they not only wrote out the religious prehistory of communism, but also any form of intellectual prehistory. There was therefore no mention of the manifesto's intellectual debt to German classical historians, nor to the so-called German historical school of law on the history of forms of ownership. To Adam Smith or Simone de Simondi on the operation of commercial society, to Proudhon's criticism of both property and community, to development within the 17th century natural law traditions of a historical conception, both of community and of private property of a historical conception, property. In the drafting of the manifesto, any reference to those ideas, religious or secular, disappeared. Attention was deflected from socialist or communist ideas to the social forces supposedly represented by them. In this way, the history of socialism or communism appeared to become synonymous with the emergence of the industrial proletariat and the transition to modern society, starting from the Industrial Revolution in Britain and spreading to Europe and North America. Wars and revolutions became byproducts of the social and political struggles engendered by the global industrialization process. But despite the manifesto, socialism and communism was never to become synonymous with the outlook of the proletariat. The proletariat is the upper class, if you guys did not know that. I should probably look up when I'm reading. The speculative or quasi-religious origins and character of socialist creeds, including that built upon the pronouncements of manifesto itself, continue to shine through the laboriously elaborated socio-economic facade. It was not the mere fact of the proletarization that generated the wars and revolutions of the 20th century, but the experiences of social and political upheaval shaped and articulated through the militant and apocalyptic languages of communism or revolutionary socialism. For this reason, historians have rightly likened the passions and I will say this reading is making me use words that I've never used before. I'm going to tell you that right now. Where was it at? It was not the mere fact of proletarianization that generated the wars and revolutions of the 20th century, but the experiences of social political upheaval shaped and articulated through the militant and apocalyptic languages of communism or revolutionary socialism. For this reason, historians have rightly likened the passions and transigence of extremism of 20th century revolutions to the religious wars of the 16th and 17th centuries. Similar reasoning also needs to be applied to the question of socialist decline in the second half of the 20th century. Although the crisis of socialist doctrine and collapse of communist states were clearly hastened by political, military, and social economic factors, the marked secularization of political beliefs in the decades after 1950 was equally important. The end of communism was not the end of history, but the end of an epoch in which criticism of a global capitalism overlapped with the rise and the fall of a powerful and organized post-Christian religion that, in the name of science, addressed itself as to the oppressed. The last general point to be made about the continuing historical importance of the manifesto concerns its power as text. Its rhetorical force, its claim and slogans were remembered even by those who had never read it. A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. The history of the hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Proletarians have nothing to lose except their chains. Working men of all countries unite. Proletariats, working class, bourgeois, rich people. I think I said it wrong the last time. Bourgeois, rich people, proletariat, us. But the power of the manifesto did not simply consist of these memorable phases, nor would it be claimed that its impact derived from its overall design. The last section was hurriedly jotted down and looks unfinished, while the third section, despite its occasionally brilliant jibes, is arbitrary and sectarian. Undoubtedly, then, its power is concentrated in the first two sections, propelled forward by the caustic and apparently undeviating logic of its arguments and enlivened by its startling rhetorical shifts. Each paragraph still preserves the capacity to surprise and disconcert. Even now, and certainly in the 1840s, readers of a manifesto might have expected to find, as they would have found in an earlier draft composed by Friedrich Engels, a declaration of the principles of communism, or even, in a yet earlier version proposed by another member of the Communist League, Moses Hess, a communist confession. In the 1840s, as will become clear, communism was overwhelmingly identified either with radical traditions of Christianity or with the extremes of Jacobean rationalism deriving from the French Revolution. The starting point of the manifesto is quite different. It opens the sustained tribute its declared antagonists. The very epitome of private property and egoism, the bourgeois, and the modern bourgeois society, the bourgeois had accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, Gothic cathedrals. In a mere 100 years, it had created more massive and more colossal productive forces than have all preceding generations together. If modern bourgeois society were now approaching its end and about to yield to its opposite, communism, it was not because of the failings of the bourgeois, but because of its triumphs. This end was nigh, like the sorcerer who's no longer able to control the powers of the netherworld whom he has called up by his spells. The bourgeois, through their very magnitude of the material advance which it had accomplished, had forged the weapons that bring death itself. The rich will eat themselves, is what is being said. The rich dig their own graves, which we already knew. All right, I'm going to continue. It also called into existence the men who are to wield those weapons, the modern working class, the proletarians. The first section then concludes with an account of the formation of the proletariat into a class. Modern industry, or the Industrial Revolution, the great bourgeois achievement, had replaced the isolation of the laborers with their revolutionary combination into a group. The fall of the bourgeois and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable. Period. The second section is no less striking, though wholly different in tone. In a remarkable switch from epic to bathos, the scene shifts from the factory and the counting house to the bourgeois interior. So we're shifting. In the second part, we're going to be shifting from like the working class point of view to the rich people point of view in this reading that we're doing in the future. There the bourgeois stands, no longer a Herculean, like Hercules, artificer, a world transformer, rather a self-pitying paterfamilias, a wielding householder, wiping the cold sweat of fear from his brow and wringing his pudgy hands in an entreaty to escape the retribution which communism is sure to bring. Let me read that again. Let me read that whole thing. Let me read this whole, 2 paragraphs. This end was nigh, like the sorcerer who's no longer able to control the powers of the netherworld whom he has called up by his spells. The bourgeois, though the very magnitude of the material advance which it had accomplished had forged the weapons that bring death to itself, had also called into existence the men who are to wield those weapons, the modern working class, the proletarians. The first section then concludes with an account of the formation of the proletariat into a class. Modern industry, or the Industrial Revolution, the great bourgeois achievement, had replaced the isolation of the laborers with their revolutionary combination into a group. The fall of the bourgeois and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable. The second section is no less striking, though wholly different in tone. In a remarkable switch from epic to bathos, the scene shifts from the factory and the counting house to the bourgeois interior. There, the bourgeois stands no longer a Herculean artificer, a world transformer, rather a self-pitying paterfamilias, a wheedling householder, wiping the cold sweat of fear from his brow and wringing his pudgy hands in an entreaty to escape the retribution which communism is sure to bring. Despite its title, Proletarians and Communists, this section mainly consists of imaginary dialogue between the communists and the bourgeois, a dialogue in which the physiognomy don't know how to pronounce that, of the communist part of the communist specter is delineated in its almost lurid and flesh-creeping detail. The passage is both bitter and teasing. Most of the wild charges against communists that they practice the community of women, the abolition of the abolition of nationality, the destruction of property, and civilization are thrown back at the bourgeois' feet. A few the communists cheerfully accept. If therefore the specter is exercised, it is in wholly unreassuring manner, for the bourgeois is invited to cast away his childish fears, only to confront the world and grown-up terrors of a coming revolution. The playful sadism of the passage is in turn only made possible by a third and equally arresting feature of the manifesto: the changed identity of the communists. It is no longer the communist who threatens the bourgeois. Communist takes no personal responsibility for the imminent expropriation of the bourgeois, and even the proletariat will only be playing the role which history has assigned to it. Communists are no longer those who espouse a particular set of ideas or principles. They merely express it in general terms. Actual relations springing from existing class struggle, from a historical movement going on under our own very eyes. This historical movement is an expression of the revolt of modern productive forces against modern conditions of production, against the property relations that are the conditions for the existence of the bourgeois under its rule. The sole defining feature of the communist is a clear awareness of the fact. Let me read that again. The revolt of modern productive forces. The revolt of modern productive forces against modern conditions of production, against the property relations that are the conditions for the existence of the bourgeois in its rule. Gonna have to reread that one again. The sole defining feature of the communist is a clear awareness of this fact. The communist, therefore, is one who has the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. Among these ultimate general results are the disappearance of class distinctions and the concentration of all production in the hands of the associated individuals, or as the later English version termed it, a vast association of the whole nation. Eventually, the public power will lose its political character, and in place of the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, there will be a rise and association in which the free development of each is the condition for free development of all. Were these audacious claims the product of a single process of reasoning, or did a semblance of theoretical unity conceal a more contingent and ad hoc assemblage of propositions derived from different sources? Why should a declaration of communism have placed such emphasis on the world-transforming achievements of the bourgeois? Why should it have been imagined that the existing and political systems were unreformable, or that the periodic economic crises were signs of the impeding end of the property system as a whole? Why should it have been assumed that there was a particular affinity between the grievances of workers and the goals of communism? Finally, why should it have been believed that a historical process governed not by ideals but by the clash of materially contending interests, the class struggle would nevertheless deliver with such a morally desirable result? that was just the preface, guys. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm not gonna lie to you and say that I understood everything, because I'm gonna be honest. Sometimes with reading, especially with words like especially like educational reading and stuff like that, it's not really easy for me. Um, I focus so much on just trying to get the words out correctly that I kind of don't like really just try to digest what's being read and stuff like that. There's a book that I have on the shelf in my room. It's called Stamped from the Beginning, History of Slavery and How it Started in America. And even in that book, it was something that took me like, I still haven't finished it. I'm only halfway, and it's quite a sizable book, and it's really hard to read. So with that being said, guys, I'm going to pull up this website. I think it's a really cool source that everyone should be using. Let me see. How do you update stuff on stream? Let me see. I try to update this on stream. I hope you guys can see that I'm not drawing, but I am try to edit the stream info. I couldn't. Whatever. Anyway, we're gonna bring up that stuff like I said. Here it is. Let me see. All right. So I think I actually might turn the volume up just for this. I tried to put the audio on this so you guys can hear as well. So yeah, here we go. So on liberationschool.org, if you look up Communist Manifesto, it'll come with a whole bunch of results. Like, for example, yeah, so you see we got a whole bunch of material here going over the Communist Manifesto and all that good stuff. So we're just going to go through one of them right now, a couple of those questions, and we can have a discussion. Even if it's just amongst myself, that's fine. I'm going to still have my own discussion. So let me shrink this page real quick. All right. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto as a complete theoretical and practical party program for the initially German-based and then international Communist League. It was written and published during the great heat of revolutionary uprisings in Europe in 1848 and continues to inspire the revolutionary struggle across the globe today. We hope this guide, which focuses on key arguments and concepts, will help newcomers and veterans alike take all they can from this crucial theoretical document. For more background and context to this, see the Communist Manifesto, a working class guide to changing the world, or listen to it via Liberation Audio. So, preface. Friedrich Engels, 1888. How does Engels explain why the Communist Manifesto was written? So based off of what I read, let me go back. I believe what I read, that the Communist Manifesto came from a time when the Industrial Revolution was first hitting Europe, Britain, and Germany, and Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx saw the rapid development of the industrialization and the assembly line, and he saw how the culture changed from, I don't really understand how it was before then, and I'm sure we're going to get that further along and stuff like that, but from what I was reading, it came from a time after the Industrial Revolution and stuff like that. Yeah, in short, the manifesto sketches a version of reality that the start of a new millennium and against a background of endless chatter, yada yada. And the period looks at a powerful and contemporary picture of our own world as it might have appeared to those reading it in 1848. In the period before 1870, political economists were slow to recognize the transforming power of industrialization because they remained haunted by fears of overpopulation. So it came from that, That's what I'm assuming. So we can also ask Google. Let's ask Google if we don't always know, if we're not sure of the answers, right? It's always it's always important to do our own research and stuff like that if we don't. It didn't really answer. Well, I guess I also answered it. I thought more so like why it was written, as in like what happened, cause and effect. But this Google answer also answers it and just reframes everything that I wrote or that I read. So we can just go over those key points as well here on Google. So these people wanted to provide a program by the, and it was. So the Communist Manifesto, this is all just theory. These, like these guys just got together and they were speaking about this stuff, whatever. It just so happens, though, that these guys were onto something. Like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. A lot of the things that are in here have happened and have come to place. So another thing is that it intended to apply historical materialism, arguing that history is driven by class struggle and that the Industrial Revolution necessitated a new radical workers' movement. Yep. It also was used to clear up what communism meant. But more so like my own answers rather than looking at Google and stuff like that. The reason that, like I said, like, also, I guess, just hopping on what Google said, it came at a time where workers were, work life has changed, right? You just introduced, like, the steam engine railroads and industrialization and stuff like that. And now the workforce has changed. You introduce the assembly line and you start, like, artisanal people that are making things, like, from scratch, like, from hand sewing things. Now you can just go to a factory and get it done quicker. And they're paying you like shitty dollars, and they control all the means of production. And so he was able to see that happening like in real time and stuff like that, and that's why it was written. What is the larger context around which the Communist Manifesto was situated? We're going to maybe just listen to this because I'm having a hard time maybe answering this. What is the larger context around which the Communist Manifesto was situated around, according to Engels? We're just going to listen to this, guys.
You're listening to Liberation News, the newspaper of the Party for Socialism and Liberation.
The Communist Manifesto, a working-class guide to changing the world. The Communist Manifesto stands among the most well-read books of all time. 160 years after it was first published, it has been reprinted hundreds of times in most of the world's languages. It has been praised, slandered, banned, and distorted.
I want you guys to be able to hear this on stream. I don't know how to do this. Let me see. Look it up. Okay, settings. Audio. Under global devices. Desktop audio. Is that, yeah? Alright. Let's see.
Certainly more than any other political pamphlet, the Communist Manifesto has stood the test of time. It is studied in schools, colleges, workplaces, activist study groups, and underground discussion groups all over the world.
Let's see. I think this might be it. Audio output capture, okay. We're learning Twitch together, guys. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to figure out audio output. Okay. Okay. Okay, so hopefully this is it.
The reason that the Communist Manifesto remains such an inspiration for revolutionary change is that it is not just the musings of social reformers, philosophers, or political wannabes. It is a working-class guide for changing the world. Written in the heat of battle. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote the manifesto in 1848 when they were 29 and 27 years old, respectively. All of Europe was in turmoil. In France, there was growing dissatisfaction with the bourgeois king, Louis Philippe. National uprisings against the Austro-Hungarian Empire were just under the surface. Opposition to the feudal monarchs ruling the German and Italian states was mounting, along with growing demands for national unification. Much of this discontent came from petty bourgeois shopkeepers and intellectuals. In France,
wait, actually, we're just gonna all right. Where did it go? Start from the beginning. Okay.
You're listening to Liberation News, the newspaper of the Party for Socialism and Liberation.
The Communist Manifesto, a working-class guide to changing the world. The Communist Manifesto stands among the most well-read books of all time. 160 years after it was first published, it has been reprinted hundreds of times in most of the world's languages. It has been praised, slandered, banned, and distorted. Certainly more than any other political pamphlet, the Communist Manifesto has stood the test of time. It is studied in schools, colleges, workplaces, activist study groups, and underground discussion groups all over the world. The reason that the Communist Manifesto remains such an inspiration for revolutionary change is that it is not just the musings of social reformers, philosophers, or political wannabes. It is a working-class guide for changing the world. Written in the heat of battle. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote the manifesto in 1848 when they were 29 and 27 years old, respectively. All of Europe was in turmoil.
Damn.
In France, there was growing dissatisfaction with the bourgeois king, Louis Philippe. National uprisings against the Austro-Hungarian Empire were just under the surface. Opposition to the feudal monarchs ruling the German and Italian states was mounting, along with growing demands for national unification. Much of this discontent came from petty bourgeois shopkeepers and intellectuals. In France, this class had been instrumental in the 1789 bourgeois revolution, but had been sidelined under Louis Philippe. In the rest of continental Europe, they were still politically disenfranchised. These forces were mainly interested in becoming the new ruling class. Skilled artisans also felt the bite of the newly emerging capitalist social system. Loss of their guilds forced many of them into traveling communities of workers that moved anywhere to find work. The ranks of the former artisans, now workers, spawned many radical activists who believed in the struggle for, as Engels said, total social change. The bourgeoisie was relatively unconcerned with addressing the problems of the new working classes. Workers were forced to labor 13 to 15 hours a day and live in run-down and disease-ridden slums. Their numbers were constantly increasing. They had been pauperized by the economic changes of capitalism around them. The emergence of the modern working class as a political force was the main element that separated the political climate in the late 1840s from the revolutionary ferments of earlier years. From the new working class, secretive revolutionary organizations sprung up across Europe. Some were inspired by earlier socialists like Saint-Simon and Fourier. Others were inspired by internationalists like Philippe Buonarroti and Gracchus Babeuf, leaders of the extreme left wing of the French Revolution. Militants like Louis-Auguste Blanqui tried to set up insurrectionary groups in France. One such group, the League of the Just, had participated with Blanqui's supporters in an uprising in Paris in 1839. It was this group, renamed in 1847 as the Communist League, that commissioned the young radicals Marx and Engels in December 1847 to draft a program for the anticipated uprisings. In February 1848, the Communist Manifesto appeared as the fighting program of the Communist League. The manifesto appeared on the streets of Paris shortly before the February 1848 uprising in that city. That uprising spread with revolutionary fervor across Europe. This revolutionary wave gave the manifesto an audience among revolutionary activists, raising Marx's profile in the working class movement. The science of social change. What separated the Communist Manifesto from the dozens of programs and manifestos issued by other revolutionary groups of the day? Why are all those other programs forgotten today, but the manifesto is still widely read? What is it that has given this small pamphlet the ability to captivate Alabama sharecroppers, Russian revolutionaries, and Chinese peasants alike? Marx and Engels incorporated the most advanced political, economic, and philosophical thought of the time into scientific socialism, determining the laws by which society changed, and then applying those laws to bring about socialism and, in due course, a communist society. They applied the dialectical method of the German philosopher Georg Hegel to the materialism of the most advanced scientific thinkers. In this way, they were able to identify class struggle as the motive force of history. Based on an economic analysis of capitalist society and the historical development of society's productive forces, they identified the working class as the only really revolutionary class, the class that had the potential not only to liberate itself, but all of humanity. Starting with their often quoted phrase, "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle," the two young revolutionaries sketched in a popular way the history of class struggle from its beginning until 1848. In this way, they were able to put the individual struggles of workers in this city or that country into the overall framework of the struggle of exploited against exploiters. It is that context that allows the manifesto to speak to revolutionaries around the world struggling against capitalism. Rooted in working class organization. The historic significance of the Communist Manifesto is not only due to the brilliance of the ideas that Marx and Engels elaborated. They themselves acknowledged that most of the essential ideas in the manifesto had already been elaborated. although not in a unified way. The importance of the manifesto can hardly be overstated. It is not just a pamphlet, but the program of a revolutionary workers' organization in the ongoing struggle against capitalism. The defeat of the 1848 revolutions led to major reprisals against revolutionaries. The Communist League was disbanded amid the anti-communist trials in Cologne in 1852. Undeterred, Marx and Engels continued toward the task outlined in the manifesto, the organization of the proletarians into a class and consequently into a political party. Marx's position in the International Workers' Association, the First International, kept the program of the manifesto in the minds of working-class revolutionaries, even though the specific demands had changed to meet the new political circumstances. This, in turn, led to the founding of mass socialist parties in Germany and France, expanding the reach of the manifesto as the foundational document for many who considered themselves socialists and communists into the first half of the 20th century. The triumph of the 1917 Russian Revolution opened the era of proletarian revolution. For the first time, the document that had accompanied the working class sectors of the 1848
give it a rest for that. So yeah, so that was that. Let's see if we could find maybe like something else. Vamos a leer este. Vamos a ver. Alright, let's just read this first run. Written in the heat of battle, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote the manifesto in 1848 when they were 29 and 27 years old. I'm gonna be honest, that was one of the most surprising things to me. Like, I'm 28. So, all of Europe was in turmoil. In France, there was a growing dissatisfaction with the bourgeois King Louis Philippe. National uprisings against the Austro-Hungarian Empire were just under the surface. Opposition to the feudal monarchs ruling the German and Italian states was mounting along with the growing demands for national unification. Much of this discontent came from the petty bourgeois shopkeepers, intellectuals, like they said in the podcast. In France, this class had been instrumental in the 1789 bourgeois revolution, but had been sidelined under Louis Philippe. We read this. Yep, we read this. Let's see if there's another I don't know why this goes to like fucking Bing. I hate Bing. I don't know anyone that uses Bing. Y'all, I have not seen Spark Notes since forever. I used to use Spark Notes in high school. I remember like I wrote one paper like just entirely off of Spark Notes because I was just over it and I was over life. And my teacher was like, yeah, next time get your paper not from Spark Notes. This is a D. Yes, the ad.
Yeah, for a running shoe commercial.
That's damn near Jesus. That's crazy. Is Spark Notes you gotta pay for now? Spark Notes used to just be built off of the backs of the people. And we used to all use Spark Notes. What is going on? This is capitalism. Look at, they done commodified fucking Spark Notes, bruh. Spark Notes was a community thing. This is the intro. I read the preface, so Next time I'll read the intro. Whoa, 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 whoa. That's crazy though. That. Yeah, I think it's fucking crazy that Spark Notes, you gotta pay for it now, guys. Yup. With that being said, do you guys maybe want to go over the One Piece spoilers? Yo, my teeth look so shiny. Y'all would not know that I just came today from the dental appointment and I had hella cavities. Y'all don't even want to know how many cavities I had. It was horrible. Excuse me. I have like three mixers on here. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me parquet. Now me making a beat off my teeth. I'm telling myself I need a life. Alright, you guys have a good night. I'm thinking about doing this every Wednesday night. For 1 hour, we're gonna be reading. We're gonna be discussing this. My goal for this year is to read a lot more books, intellectual books that get your mind going and stuff like that. But I'm not gonna lie, like this type of stuff, like I can only just read a little bit because with everything that's been going on in the world, just in general with everything, just life, it's nice to be able to take a step back and just breathe and live a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, it's important for us to like really like learn about this and like dissect it and all this stuff, but I think it's also important to have lived experience and stuff like that, and that's also something that I'm like really focused on trying to do. So all right guys, thank you guys so much for coming, and you guys have a good night.